Be sure to check out my new artwork, The Initiation. Just click the picture and it'll take you right to my shop.
Today I'd like to talk to you a little bit about knee pain. And you know, there are a million different opinions on the internet about how to train properly, how to squat properly, how to do this, how to do that. But the thing is that what I've realized is excessive range of motion can cause injuries, you know, and there is this huge fascination with excessive range of motion. So it's almost like people are trying to blend weight training with yoga. And in certain circumstances, certain ranges of motion are needed for certain sports, right? But the problem is sometimes people are not realizing their own limitations, and these limitations can be based on a lot of different factors. Sometimes it's genetic, sometimes it's just plain flexibility issues, and sometimes it's injuries. Sometimes you actually have injuries that you don't know about that are not fixable. You know, sometimes if you have a torn ligament and it's torn right off the bone and you can't get surgery, say you're not a candidate for this, then you will be a type of person that has to train around that. You don't have the option of just sewing yourself back together like Humpty Dumpty, or piecing yourself back together. Okay, so ultimately a lot of people that haven't had injuries will look at people that have had injuries and say, oh, well, you're doing this wrong, you're doing this wrong, but they don't understand that the body moves differently after an injury. Okay, so barring that, I'm just going to basically give you some tips that may help you with your knee pain. Okay, I've helped a few guys in the gym about this. And a lot of times there's some pretty simple sort of adjustments you can make, okay, that will start to keep you from hurting your knees regularly just from training, because the whole goal of bodybuilding is to train your muscles, not your joints, okay? So the first thing is that a lot of times people try to go too low on their squat. Now, I'm not saying low is bad, but what I'm saying low in the wrong way will be bad for your knees. If you go too low and you can no longer keep your back arched, okay, and you start to butt wink, you start to lower around your back, what will happen is that the hamstrings, okay, see this is your femur, right? Your hamstrings now will be shortened. Now, why does that matter? Well, when there's no tension on the hamstrings, what happens is that the knee joint is a little bit more flimsy because the hamstring keeps the joint, the knee, locked right in the joint. Say the hamstring's down here, and this is the knee, and this is the kneecap, okay? It pulls the tibia right in, it pulls the bones right in so that the knee is tight, okay? That's what hamstring tightness does to you. Now, if your bum rounds in, if your lower back rounds in, what will happen is this tension leaves, and now the knee will be a little looser, and you may get a grinding, or you may get a pull or a tweak in a funny sort of way, okay? So one of the best ways you can actually avoid this is by making sure you keep your back neutral or slightly arched when you squat. That way you keep the tension on the hamstring, okay? And if your back starts to round under, that means it's too low for you at this time, so you can either train your hamstring flexibility, you can train your adductor flexibility, perhaps you have some sort of labral problem in your hip, maybe there's some sort of looseness in there that's causing the muscles to overcompensate and be too tight. Whatever it is that this is the right range for you for now. Whatever range you can keep your back flat or arched. Another one is that in the overwhelming attempt to go low in their squat, some people start to widen their stance, they start to shift it around, and they say, okay, going low is the most important thing. Who cares about what muscles I'm working? So let's widen my stance a bit. So some people widen their stance, and some people, they turn their toes outwards, because they're trying to take the hamstring out of the movement, because that's what it does. The hamstrings, the more involved they are, then it'll be harder for you to go down low. Okay, so if you open up your hips a little bit, you'll be able to go down lower. But the disadvantage of this technique, because it might be the right technique for you, but the disadvantage of it is you may be getting a rotating inwards of your knee joint. And if your knees are rotating inwards, what will happen is that you may excessively put stress on your MCL. Okay, your MCL or any of the other ligaments there. So the fact is that if you notice your knees are starting to rotate inwards, then you need to either adjust by strengthening up your hips, your outer hips, your glute medius, by strengthening, or really make a conscious effort. You may wrap elastic bands around your knees to make sure you are constantly fighting that tension, so that way you find the neutral ground again, so that way your knees remain over your ankles instead of caving inwards is the right word, caving, okay? So you need to do some strength there, or you need to adjust your technique. So you basically can bring your toes in again to wherever it is that you find that your knees and your feet remain in proper balance. They're in proper alignment. So a rookie mistake in leg training is to push off the toes or push off the ball of the toes. You know, because people can do this with their body weight all day, or, you know, they're used to doing some sort of sports where they're bouncing off their toes, but they don't realize that this is actually a dangerous movement for people with normal knees. I mean, if you got Tom Platt's knees, you can actually get away with this and build big quads, and you might be this person. But if you're watching this video, chances are you're not, because you probably have some knee pain somewhere. So, you know, the thing is, you want to push off your heels or through the middle of the foot when you're doing any sort of squat exercise or any sort of leg press or any lunge, okay? The reason why you want to do this is that it adds stability, okay, because there's more of the foot in contact with the ground, but at the same time, you're changing the force from a shearing force on the knee, and you're actually adjusting it more towards the hip. So the hip is taking more of the stress instead of the knee itself. Ultimately, this will lead to less knee problems, and it'll lead to more strength. This is why you don't see powerlifters, you know, pushing off of their toes when they're squatting. Another tip would be, and it goes in alignment with actually pushing off the toes, is that some people think squatting means you have to stand straight upright and squat up and down, you know, like they're sitting on a Smith machine or something, you know, and so upright at all costs is what I'll call this tip. You know, some people want to stand upright at all costs, so they want to just bend the knees purely and then come straight up. And that's basically what they want to do, because they've seen Olympic lifters do this and certain types of lifters. Now, if your knees can take it, like I said, that's fine, but you have to adjust your technique accordingly, okay? It's not a standard squat at that point. And I'll show you in this clip here that a lot of people that are Olympic lifters and stuff, they will adjust their stance accordingly so that they do remain more straight up and down, but now their stance is more open and a little bit wider, or the toes are pointed outwards. And of course, this will shift depending on the person. This will change the stance, but ultimately this is more towards what they do, instead of keeping it to a bodybuilder squat, which is a little narrower and keeping the stress on the quadriceps and the hamstrings. What they want to do is stay upright at all costs, okay? So
now, why do they want to stay straight up and down? The reason why they want to stay straight up and down is because they're going to be lifting weight over their head, and they need the weight to stay above them, because it's just like the teeter-totter principle. I mean, it's a lever arm point. If the arm is extended and the weight is above your head, any degree of bending over will put an extreme amount of stress on the spine and on the shoulders and everything, and they'll lose their balance, right? So it's a balance issue. And so it's more about a sport-specific reason why they need to stay straight up and down, but it doesn't increase your muscle mass gains, or it's by no means necessary in order for muscle mass gains to happen, okay? So again, I'm saying if you want to squat straight up and down, that's fine, but at the same time, you have to adjust your technique, and you know, it's basically an individual thing. It's not like one way of squatting is wrong and the other way of squatting is right.
here's a tip too, just for those of you out there that are using some machines for training. I mean, I rarely ever do leg extensions, and if I do them light, you know, because they're not activating the hamstring at the same time as the quadriceps, so that's why I stay away from that. I like to activate all the muscles around that support the knee at the same time as I'm adding tension to the muscles, okay? But what some people do is they'll jump on, say, something like a hack squat. And a hack squat is a very popular movement, and for a lot of people, it doesn't bother them. They're fine. But for some of the demographic, it does bother their knees. And the reason why is because you're staying straight up and down as you're squatting. As you're hack squatting, you're staying straight up and down. You can see there's no bend over in the upper body. So when you're not bending over even slightly, then there's no hamstring activation, or very little, okay? And with the less activation of the hamstring, the more loose the knee joint will be, and the more dependent you will be on the vastus medialis in the knee to actually be able to take all the stress and be able to keep the knee together. Now for me, I think I have some weak ligaments in my knee from, you know, kicking in karate and stretching on the chairs, doing the splits like Van Damme, all this kind of stuff I did for years. So this is not the ideal type of exercise for me. And I remember one day when I was like 19 years old doing 5 plates a side on the hack squat, and I just felt my knee just all of a sudden pop or something, and it just didn't feel right after. Like hack squat was never right for me. So here's a tip you can do. If hack squats don't work for you, just turn around and treat it like a squat. So now there's a slight bend over, but now you're still getting the stability of the machine. You're still getting that advantage to help you out with your squat workouts. Okay. So there's a lot of other tips out there and a lot of other things, but these are some just general tips, okay? So forgive me if I'm not getting into all biomechanics and science of how every single scenario can be overcome. But the fact is that I believe 100% in being with your body as it is right now, and these are some general tendencies that you can incorporate in your training to keep yourself from injuring your knees. So make sure you subscribe and share if you like my stuff. And thanks for watching, and take care for now.
Do it your way.
Now you know my name, calling me in a drought. I came to Ridge in 215 and sorted it all out.